I've got recommended like this channel's videos a couple times, like basically defending aspects of Infinite Wealth. I don't even really know like what to expect from them, just that they defend aspects of Infinite Wealth I consider really bad, but also that they're like 10-ish minutes long each, so I don't even know if they're gonna make like that much strong points. I just thought might as well check them out, like give my thoughts. But yeah, I guess I'm on to the next video, which is called Why Chitose's Redemption Arc is Better Than You Think. And then in like the thumbnail it says Chitose should be forgiven. I just find it funny because I think her redemption arc is like pretty terrible. Both the explanation of why she was going along with any of this, and like there's like a noticeable lack of like scrutiny towards Chitose and how like much of a shitty person she is. It almost feels like just because Ichiban is absurdly forgiving of her, we should just feel the same way. Supposedly her arc is about taking accountability, but the game ends with her not only facing no consequences for owning up to her actions, but even gets rewarded for them. It's such like a poorly handled redemption arc. I don't know how anyone could think it's good, but I guess we're gonna see like one person's reasoning.
Chitose, no, that's where they are. Are you for real?
Yeah, that's a quick thing, but yeah, what an insanely stupid thing of her to do, going in the same direction where Eiji and the Barracuda are. I get like, okay, you want to take Lonnie away from the tear gas. I don't think that's worth like literally like handing her over to Eiji on a silver platter. Like literally just tell her to like close her eyes or whatever you're doing, go downstairs and back into like the club. There's like no good reason to run up to Eiji. Like it's just an insanely stupid thing of her to do. It even feels like they lampshaded where Eiji is like, hey, you're going the wrong way, but like it doesn't make sense for Chitose to do that. It's a brief moment, but one that's just idiotic.
A lot of fans seem to think that her redemption felt weak, and that she got off way too easy. But that's just not the case. In fact, Chitose revealing Bleach Japan's terrible nuclear waste management plan, Bryce as the false prophet of Palekana, and herself as Tatara is a sacrifice heavier than a cargo ship.
Revealing what Bryce and Palekana were doing like the nuclear waste, that's not as much of a sacrifice, it's just a net positive which doesn't really affect herself. Revealing her identity, I guess you could say that's a sacrifice that would realistically have consequences, but the story we get doesn't have any consequences for it.
Now, Eiji's blackmail against Chitose is bigger than what the story led us to believe. Eiji exposing Chitose as Tatara leads to various dangerous effects. One is Chitose's safety. No doubt that former Yakuza will want her head on the platter. I mean, just look at how they went for Eiji in the finale.
That doesn't feel like it's like part of like what was being used to threaten her. Is mostly Ebina. My main issue with the thing, like, you threaten her with Ebina, that's enough to make her work with him. That would make sense if maybe she led, like, a peaceful life. She wasn't really, like, a capable fighter, but, like, she repeatedly goes up against powerful criminal organizations in this game. Like, she fights the Barracuda, the Ganju, the Palekana cult, Yamai Syndicate. She fights all these, like, menacing, powerful criminal groups. There's a very good risk of her dying. Why is it, like, she shows no fear in these situations, but with Eiji and Ebina, she's just so terrified that she would completely go along with it?
Second is public scrutiny. VTuber or any anonymous content creators who got exposed are always vulnerable to a lot of cyberbullying, especially since Tatara focuses on that type of content. Her fans, knowing that she is the daughter of a wealthy group that is engaged with the shipment scandal, will be a prime target for a lot of internet drama. However, none of these two threats come close to the third one, because it's not just about revealing Chitose's identity as Tatara, but it also destroys the Fujinomiya group. Chitose is the heiress, and it won't be easy, especially for their shareholders, knowing that the company will be led by a troubled personality.
Yeah, that would suck, but like, you're ruining like so many people's lives by doing what you're doing. Still feels like she gets off way too easy. She's rewarded with like ownership of a company basically, or like chairwoman position, and they praise her for doing this, but they don't really give any explanation for why this would be hard. Like, it's very difficult to portray it as anything but a net positive for her based on what information the game gives us.
Most companies will remove these types of people in any corporate positions as it stains their PR. Not to mention the whole PR nightmare of a daughter exposing their own crimes.
Her becoming the chairwoman, it's framed as like an almost completely like positive thing. Like even when the characters say like, oh, she took on like a huge responsibility, we still don't get any indication of any like actual issues she would face, despite her realistically, she should have faced a lot of consequences for what she's done.
Chitose's actions, although orchestrated by another, are still her own to take responsibility for. Stripping Ichiban and leaving him nude on the beach, luring Ichigan into the Barracuda, posing as a member of Ichiban's party to help Eiji spy on them, and of course, steal Lani. The worst of it all, Chitose's action led to the death of Wong-Tu and Hanawa, while the Palikana kidnaps Lani. But all of these actions doesn't make Chitose an irredeemable character.
Maybe not completely above redemption, but she's a pretty awful person, and the game doesn't do the legwork to actually like redeem her. Like the reasons for why she's doing any of this, the lack of consequences for her actions, it's just like the lack of acknowledgement. Like, okay, they focus on this thing with her, but not all the other awful things. Like leaving Ichiban naked on a beach is a big thing. Like regardless of how the game tries to frame it, that's a pretty like awful thing that at the time the game doesn't take that seriously or just plays off as a joke.
Still, Chitose chose to help Ichiban save Lani and put herself in more danger. I honestly thought that she was going to be hospitalized or die in the scene where Eiji's goon hit her head trying to rescue Lani.
I do think like a big part of that danger, like you mentioned earlier, is just her acting stupid, like going towards Eiji when she had no reason to. But even then, I feel like, okay, she's done a good thing. That alone doesn't mean she's redeemed herself as a person.
Chitose, revealing herself as Tatara in the finale, opens herself to public scrutiny. Nevertheless, she willingly did this in order to stop Eiji from producing any more smear campaign videos.
First off, you don't even mention like the plot issues. Like she regains control of Tadara. Why didn't she do this earlier when like she stopped working for Eiji and he found a replacement? Why didn't she log in then and like stop him from doing any more of this? And then how does she have like perfect Wi-Fi connection at like below sea level on this isolated island? Even if this place has Wi-Fi and like the one room Bryce wants to keep hidden, how did she get access to their Wi-Fi? Like these are two major things of how she was able to do this and they make zero sense. But then she doesn't face any consequences. She repeatedly exposed the Fujinomiya company and now they're just fine with letting her become chairwoman. Like they were already on bad terms before she started Tadara, and now that we learned that she's intentionally sabotaged them, that they would just let her become chairwoman, it's just complete nonsense. You're ignoring so much in order to make this sound better than it is.
Chitose, revealing her father and the Fujinomiya's group involvement in the shipment of the nuclear waste and Ebina's men to the Nele Island, sails a hard nail to the coffin of their company. I mean, who would want to do business with a group that caused an international crisis? And with that, Chitose stepping in as the head of the Fujinomiya group does not mean that she now gets to run her family's business and enjoy generational wealth.
I mean, it does. Like, it's a big company. She's the chairwoman. That's a pretty, like, good life to have. Like, especially when the other option is just facing all the consequences of her actions.
She's now going to go over hell and beyond just to fix all of these negative PRs. She's not inheriting a wealthy company. If anything, she's inheriting the massive lawsuits that the company will be receiving.
Once again, the game doesn't give any indication the company's actually suffering from this. Like, okay, there's gonna be issues. She's still the chairwoman of a massive company. I think it's disingenuous to frame this as anything other than rewarding her.
Chitose knew all of the risk, and she paid the price to finally cut the strings that made her sing and dance in the tune of revenge that Eiji and Ebina composed. Chitose finally chose to stand up against the looming threats and face them head-on. With all of this, I believe that Chitose's redemption arc is beautifully handled by RGG Studio, writing Chitose as a character who is known for exposing others, but concluding with her as the most vulnerable of them all.
What a terrible video. Just makes like terrible points, repeatedly ignores context from this game. Not even saying that like all of this makes sense, but that like Chitose should be forgiven. That she's redeemed herself basically, when you just haven't done anything to justify that claim. This one I'm curious how they're gonna justify it, cause like my issues with Kiryu's arc, how it feels like he takes a complete 180 when he wasn't really showing any like significant growth throughout the game. But then there's just the massive plot issues, like the complete lack of explanation for why he can use his name and see his family again despite the Daidoji.
Instead of seeing himself as a man who brings calamity, he is instead graced by how grateful the people are because of him. Kiryu was reminded that these people were inspired by his actions. These people who Kiryu have helped throughout the Yakuza series are now unknowingly helping Kiryu regain his mental fortitude.
My main issue is that he's in a constant state of saying like, I've given up on all of this. Occasionally he's like, oh, maybe I'll change my mind. It never feels like there's any significant progression with his emotional state, which is why him regaining his will to live feels so out of left field.
And even in the main story of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, this is what Kiryu is reminded of. And this was even his gift that he bestowed on Majima, Daigo, and Saejima when they too lose their will to fight.
It's kind of just like a weak justification, like, oh, he got to see how he influenced all these people, that made him want to live again. I mean, it's hard to do like definitive growth when like optional sub-stories that can be played in any order, but there's just no... The game plays like lip service to him like realizing the error of his ways, yet he constantly makes like the same mistakes. He still seems willing to throw his life away. The idea of it is nice, like confronting his past, like both the negative consequences of his actions but also like the positive ones, and become willing to accept them both, but that's just not what we get. Like he's just like constantly indecisive, but then at the end he decides, I want to live again.
So how exactly can Kiryu use this name, given that he is supposed to be dead? Well, the boat has already sailed on that one, since again it has been publicly leaked that Kiryu Kazuma is alive. And this is a story that even the Daidoji faction can no longer hide. There's no point for Kiryu to keep using a fake alias, and there's no point for the Daidoji faction to pretend that Kiryu is dead.
The Daidoji, they don't treat this as seriously as they should, and they let him off too easy for that, okay, but that still doesn't mean that their contract is ended, that they're just fine with him going back to his old life like nothing happened. Like, even if they're like way too lenient about what Kiryu got himself into, we get no indication that they would go this far. Like, forget about the deal, go back to your regular life, it's fine. You could justify so many terribly written stories by saying like, oh, this extremely important explanation happened off screen. It explains everything and it totally happened, you just didn't see it. You're not viewing the story on its own merits, you're making stuff up in order to make it sound better.
The Daidoji faction is not inherently evil, nor is it an omnipotent organization. We even saw how much leeway the organization gave to complete the mission on Hawaii.
While it's reasonable that like they're less powerful in a different country with a smaller group of Daidoji, that doesn't justify like their incompetence, like how unprepared they are for an ambush, especially when it's established that they still have some surveillance ability.
Such as letting Ichiban and his party be in the know of the whole organization. And we also saw their flaws, such as failing to see through Eiji.
You can't just justify anything by saying they're supposed to be flawed. It's a flaw that contradicts pre-established information about them. The Daidoji was already really inconsistent from Gaiden, but it just contradicts Infinite Wealth. Like, we see that they have some surveillance abilities. That's how they knew about Kiryu's run-in with the Barracuda. They're still capable of some amount of surveillance, yet they were completely unprepared for an ambush. But also, doesn't make sense why they couldn't look into Chitose or Eiji's backstories. We're given like no reason for why they couldn't look into their pasts.
So how did this all-powerful organization as presented in Yakuza 6 became as to what we saw in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth? The whole purpose of the Daidoji faction is to meet the interests of the Citizens Liberal Party of Japan. Thus, they are also as powerful as the political party.
But they do things that just blatantly go against their motivations. They don't care about Kiryu revealing his identity, despite that being the thing their deal was built upon. They don't care about letting random civilians in on Daidoji operations. They barely put any effort into security. This is just an example of them being weaker. They're just fundamentally different in terms of how they act.
But since they have lost the election due to Masato's failures in Yakuza Like a Dragon, this led to the current government overtaking their power. With this, the faction knows that they need Kiryu because he is the only one capable enough to fulfill the interests of the political party, and that is to oppose the government's plan regarding the disposal of nuclear waste.
That still doesn't explain why they would want him to break the main thing of their agreement. They don't want people knowing about Daidoji's war crimes. You're just going for like the most surface level things, what the game tells you, but then ignore all this information that makes it completely nonsensical.
Kiryu is given this much freedom because without him, the political party will continue to weaken.
There's literally like a sub-story where they punish him for this. Like, depending on when you play it, this can be like after the whole incident at the Seiryu Clan HQ. I mean, actually, no, it's even worse because like you can play it after this scene, meaning that after they forgive him for all of this, they go back to establishing the deal, saying he can't see his family again. You even acknowledge this lifelink at the beginning and the issues it creates, but now you're just ignoring it to focus on what this guy tells you in the main cutscenes.
And with how the story ended in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, the political party is salivating from the fall of the people's trust for the current government. The Daidoji faction no longer sees Kiryu as a threat for their secret in Onomichi, but as an asset that they can use to strengthen their political party.
Why wouldn't they see him as a threat? He knows information that could like bring down the entire group. Regardless of like how valuable it is, it shouldn't be enough to ignore. Like one of the main things of their clan, like keeping Daidoji's involvement in these war crimes secret.
Even in Like a Dragon Gaiden, this argument was brought up by the two elders in the faction. Should they treat Kiryu in a bad way? Or should they try to please him? And their decision seems more transparent now based on that post-credit scene.
They don't even explain like why they couldn't just kill him and why they have to make him an ally. Like he was completely at the Daidoji's mercy when they threatened the orphanage. Clearly it isn't hard to like get him in control. We're not given a reason for why they feel the need to make him an ally.
Kiryu Kazuma lives again, but is not yet free from the faction. So that's why in a future Like a Dragon game, there will definitely be a narrative where Kiryu tries to leave the faction and reunite with Haruka.
Isn't that the implication, that he's no longer under the Daidoji's thumb? Or are you actually implying that they're still in danger from the Daidoji, but that he did this anyway? Like, the issue is just that he's no longer under the Daidoji's thumb. That's why he can use his name. That's why he can see Haruka again. There's no way he would be fine with this if he was still under their control, but you're saying that there is? Even like a future entry explaining this, like that doesn't justify just a complete lack of explanation in this game, especially when this massive emotional payoff is built on this unanswered question. Can't just justify by saying like, oh, a future game will come along and make it better.
As the head of the Seiryu clan, Ebina formulated the plan he called the Second Dissolution, where former Yakuza will be sent to an island in Hawaii to manage the disposal of nuclear waste, wherein the former Yakuza will no longer have any contact in the outside world and will slave away until their last breath. Ebina ruthlessly planned a living hell for all of the Yakuza that he abhorred, destroying the dreams that his dead father failed to realize.
So you're acknowledging that the plan is to keep Yakuza there, endure a living hell until they die. How does that work if Nele Island gets exposed before they can die? This just undermines the entire point of why he does anything in this game.
Justifying his hatred of the hypocritical ideologies of the Yakuza, all the while being regarded as a saint that solves two major problems of Japan. Ebina is an intelligent, yet merciless antagonist.
He's not a smart person. He completely undermines his plan at the end for no clear reason. I mean, we get this cop-out reason about how he's super emotionally conflicted. He made all these irrational decisions. They only acknowledge, like, it doesn't make sense he wouldn't kill Sawashiro, but they don't acknowledge how his plan just fundamentally doesn't make any sense and how he made decisions that sabotaged it.
Ichiban holds Arakawa in the highest respect, while Ebina would be the first one to spit on his grave. And Ebina thought of a convoluted plan that will throw away the ex-Yakuza, believing that solving the mess of the dissolution is impossible. While we have Ichiban here believing that it is possible.
No, it's not that solving the mess of the dissolution is impossible. He thinks that the Yakuza are irredeemable and should be punished just for being Yakuza. It's not like he does it because he thinks it's like futile, like he wants them to suffer. It's not about that.
Why didn't Ichiban fight Ebina, despite all of these amazing parallels between the two?
I mean, one of the parallels you just made up, and like the other, it's like the most like surface level parallel. Literally just has like Ebina like spell it out. It's about as much depth as it's given.
Ebina is a cruel force that Kiryu Kazuma sees as his responsibility. First off, the brother fight has been done multiple times already in the series. Kiryu knows the pain of fighting against your own brother.
There's no actual connection between Ichiban and Ebina on like emotional level. Okay, so he learns that they're half brothers. That doesn't really change anything about their relationship. Sure, Ichiban is surprised about it, but I don't see why that would necessarily make it like harder for Ichiban to fight him. What you're mentioning, like Kiryu was like very close to Nishiki, meaning that when they fought each other at the end of Yakuza 1, it was much more of a hard thing for him to do. Even with like 7, with like him and Mazuto, he like deeply cared about him. This is just weird, like saying like, oh, it would be too hard for him when there's just no emotional connection to Ebina. We're given no indication that he would have a problem with fighting him. Like even like Mazuto, someone he cared about deeply and wanted to see the error of his ways and like grow as a person, he still wasn't afraid of like beating the shit out of him. It's just like a nonsense argument built on like nothing we get in the game itself.
And again, Ichiban values chosen family more than blood. So Ebina being revealed to him as his brother didn't even force any motivation for Ichiban to go to Millennium Tower and fight Ebina.
Feel like that's a good reason for why this wouldn't matter that much to him, and you're even saying like this doesn't really motivate him to take on Ebina himself, so you're kind of just undermined your own point right after you made it.
Kiryu admitted that he had the opportunities to correct the flaws of the Yakuza world when he was the 4th chairman of the Tojo clan, but he chose to let go of that responsibility. Kiryu believes that if he had changed the ways of the Yakuza in the past, then Ebina and his mother would have been cared for. Unfortunately, Kiryu wasn't able to.
Ebina's misfortunes happened like decades before Kiryu became chairman. Like even as early as like Yakuza 1, like Ebina's well past the point of becoming driven by revenge. Like at the point that Ebina like lost his mother, Kiryu was like still a child, not like one of the leaders of the Tojo clan. What most people try to argue is that Kiryu couldn't have fixed Ebina's life, but that represents a larger thing about how he could have helped more people by changing the Yakuza, but he didn't. I don't even like the story, but the point is that Kiryu didn't ruin Ebina's life. Kiryu sees it as like similar to like all the other people's lives who've been ruined by the Yakuza.
The snake is also spitting fire, which forms a 3-pronged flame that resembles the symbol that the Palekana uses. Not only does this provide a connection between Bryce and Ebina, but it also connects how Ebina involuntarily causes Kiryu to get cancer, since Kiryu was one of the volunteers who helped in the nuclear waste management.
From what we know, Kiryu just did like a job for like a random nuclear waste facility. We get no indication that this is a result of Palekana. Similar level of like what happened earlier, just like completely inserting events that just never happened in the story or like making these connections. There's like a surprising amount of that in these videos.
Another thing is that Ebina also has a move called Wheel of Samsara, which is a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that symbolizes Ebina's birth, his goal for the death of the Yakuza, and the rebirth of society with him as the hero.
I don't know where this is coming from. Ebina wants to be seen as a hero. It seems more like he just wants revenge, and in the case of like his complete 180 at the end of the game, he just wants someone to like reassure him. I never got the impression that this was like out of ego, that he wanted to be like seen as a hero.
All of these symbolisms in the boss fight points to Kiryu being the rightful person to stop Ebina. Kiryu is the one who is carrying the burden that the Yakuza left. Kiryu chose a path where he can correct his mistakes. Kiryu is the one willing to take away the sins of the Yakuza.
I get that was the point, but like my issue isn't like the idea of it, it's the execution. It feels like you're focusing on like the ideas of a lot of this rather than how it's actually handled. I think these might be like the worst infinite wealth defenses I've seen. I've seen like a lot of bad ones. I guess at least it was like more interesting. Like the first video was like more of like a nothing burger. Well, these are just like insanely awful. But yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed watching that. I am planning on doing like more like response videos. I guess I don't want to focus on like infinite wealth videos, but also just general Yakuza content. Because there's like a lot I want to respond to, but haven't yet. Hopefully I'll do that soon. Yeah, I guess that's about it. Thanks to everyone for watching. I'll hopefully see you next time.